Okay, so we're going to plan to go ahead and get started with our egg tempera. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do a small section of the top flower. I'm going to do a small section of this flower, small section of the stem, and a small section of the background, because really once you do a couple of leaves, everything else on there is pretty much the same. What I am using, just so you know, I have a number 4 brush for little small detailed areas. I have a number 6, a number 8 would do just fine, and then I have a little bit bigger brush. I have a 10. You could use an 8 to go ahead and hopefully very quickly be able to do the background in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start out with my number 6 brush, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little bit of my white, and a little bit of my egg yolk, again about a half to half ratio, a little bit of water if I need that. Put my rag here, and then I'm going to go ahead and go in and just cover in. My lighting's not the best in the world. It's a very overcast day. I'm not worried about making sure that this is going on thickly, because this is really a base coat for what I'm going to be working on later. Now what you may find as you're working with your egg tempera is that you can turn this, do whatever it is that you need to do, is that you may want, after you put a coat on, you may want to let it dry just a little bit and then go back in to be able to start working on layers on top of that. Now while I'm waiting on that to dry just a little bit, I'm going to come back in with a little bit of yellow, a little bit of green. What I'm going for is this light color that I see in through here, a little bit more yellow. Just putting a base coat on the stems. And then last of all, I'm going to go back in and add some white in here because I want it to be fairly light. A little bit of my egg yolk. And I'm not sure I like that. I may just go ahead and add more yellow and be done with that. And then again, add a little water if you need to. And what I'm going to do is come over here and do a little bit of this branch in. This is really, again, just going to kind of be our base coat. One of the things that I think is very, very interesting to do, you notice we're not using that many colors. We're essentially using blue, a red, a little bit of yellow, a little bit of green, and black to help darken values, and white to help lighten values. It's a very limited palette, but it's amazing how many colors that you can get into that limited palette. So that's all I'm going to do there. Now, one of the things I would encourage you to do is to focus on one flower at a time. Meaning I would start with this flower, which is what we're going to do, and then when you're totally done with that, come on and do your second flower. Now what I want to do is go back in here and maybe start putting in a little bit of some of the light colors. Now this top petal is very, very light. I'm going to add a tiny bit of white to that. Not a lot of color in there and not a lot of value, just really over on that right side where you see the shadow. But what I'm going to do is kind of come back in with a little bit of my yellow. You know what? Too much white, I need more yellow. The neat thing is you can work your colors back and forth just as much as you need to. Now one of the things I want you to notice how easy this is to blend in. Come in with this yellow where I see it here. And then I'm going to rinse out my brush and just kind of roll the water off. And then all I'm going to do is kind of come back in and think about just light feather strokes. And almost no water on the brush. I don't know if you all remember this, but Andrew Wyeth was a huge egg tempera lover. Did a lot of his work in egg tempera. Now as I come out, you'll notice that some of that white starts to blend in with that. And then I'm going to go ahead, since I've got that color mixed, I'll come on back over into this petal, kind of do a little bit of the same thing. I'm going to see a little bit of that white in, or excuse me, that yellow in through the middle here. And again, if you get it too dark, like right now mine looks like it's a little bit bolder than what I originally did, not a problem. We're going to be going back in and putting several more layers on top of that. That's what, quite frankly, makes the egg tempera look, to me, so detailed. I'm just going to kind of pity pat here and there. And then again, if you want to go back in, roll off that brush, kind of get it mostly dry, and then you can come back in and kind of soften some of those edges as well. Sometimes the more this dries, the easier it is to blend in. There we go. Now, leave that alone for a little bit. I'm going to go back in now. I'm going to use a little bit of my Alizarin Crimson. If I can get it on my brush. A little bit of egg. And I'm going to use just a little bit of white. Just a tiny bit. And what I'm going to do is really kind of dry off my brush and just come back in, get that even lighter. And in these areas where I see a little bit of that pink color, I'm going to come back in and start putting in my pink. And I'm just going to kind of soften up those edges for now, because we're going to be coming back in there with more white. And of course the purple value for the shadows. Now the neat thing is I hope you can see this on the camera, you get so dry brush that you can literally just pat and have those edges fade so pretty. Now I think before I do anything else, I'm going to come on back in. I'm going to mix up some of my blue with a tiny bit of Alizarin Crimson and make a purple that I'm happy with. You may like a more reddish purple. Some of you may like something that's a little bit more to the blue tone. Add a little, we're going to add white to that because we don't want to go too dark, too dark on here. A little bit more blue, a little bit of egg. There we go. And then I'm going to kind of turn my board around and start putting in the shadow that you see over here. So here we go. Now what you may find is that we may put this on, err on the side of caution. You can always darken something if you need to. If you do get it too dark, don't worry about it. You can always lighten it some. So I'm going to bring this out just a little ways and continue that up this way. That shadow's going to come up to about right here. little bit more feather strokes, just a little bit right in through there. And then rinse my brush out. Kind of roll it off. And again, real dry brush, starting right at that edge. You could almost crosshatch. This is the fun part of learning something new, is figuring out what it is that works for you. Notice that when I'm mixing the egg tempera, I'm not using a lot of water. Even when I'm mixing on my palette. See, I want to get that lightened out some. All I'm doing is going all the way back to the edge, and I can actually kind of pull out some of that color. And this is the joy of having it dry a little bit, because I can really do a lot of really pretty fading into that yellow. Now I see that I need to go back in here, maybe add a little bit more of my purple in through here. And then again, I'm just going to kind of use a really fairly dry brush. If your brush is too wet, I don't know if you can see, I kind of pulled up a little bit of color right there. But if the brush is too wet, it can pull up the color that you've already got on there. And if that's the case, just dry your brush off some more. But again, I'm just dabbing here, really blending that line out. Now, I'm going to let that dry a little bit. I'm going to go back in with pure white. A little bit of my egg mixed in there with it. And I'm going to kind of go back in. Look at that. Start kind of adding some of my really nice strong white back in here. And then what's going to happen is I'll be able to blend that into the red a little bit. Same thing over here with the yellow. We'll probably come back and put a little bit more white on there. But again, I just want to go back in at this point, dry my brush off really well, and start softening up those lines. See, I'm just dragging the white into the red. Now, full disclosure, I have to tell you, I may have used Winsor Red and not Alizarin when I did the original. I honestly can't remember. So again, you can use either one you want. It'll give you a little bit different. It'll be more pink versus more red, but who's going to sweat the small stuff? See how I'm just really dry brush, blending those lines in. And then the same thing over here, I'll kind of drag my white over, soften up those reds. Very, very dry brush. You can even wash some of that white over the purple if you want to. Now, I'm going to go back with a little bit more white. I'd like to soften this up a little bit more. Again, notice how dry brush. The joy of this, honestly, is you can play with it for hours. As a matter of fact, you know, you can stop and go on to another leaf and come back and say, ooh, you know what? I think I'd like to have more of this, and go back and work on it. Or you can wait a week and go back and work on it. Either way. A little bit of water in that. more white up in through here. And I'm going to come over and start working a little bit with my purple. Again, that's that purple color with the blue, a little bit of your red, and we'll come back in and start kind of putting in the shadow that we see here. Now I'm not trying to go super dark here. I actually would prefer to start a little bit lighter and build up color. And then what's going to happen is that I'm going to see some of this kind of coming down. Turn this to the side. The really cool thing that you're going to start to see is how you can work back and forth with your egg tempera to get your values in. I'm going to go ahead and bring a lot of that purple on down this way. Go back in and add a little white. And then we'll let that dry just a little bit. And I'll kind of come back over and through here. I've got a shadow. Always have, usually have that contrast. So if you've got really light area, which I'm going to have here, I'm going to come back in and start with my purple shadow that I'm going to have in through here. There's a little bit of the white right at that edge there, so I'll kind of leave that alone. And we're also going to have a lot of light underneath where that shadow is. Again, playing our darks against our lights. And then what I'll do is clean off my brush. Again, get it fairly dry. Come back in. Start softening up those edges. A lot of this is just pat, pat, pat. Blending that out a little bit. And then what I'm going to do, go back with a little bit more of this purple right in through here, and then let that dry a little bit. With that white underneath it, sometimes, you've gone to try to blend in that color, and you end up having the color kind of pick up. Just stop and leave it alone for a little bit. I'm going to go back now with just, again, some plain white. And what I want to do is kind of come on back in, and I'm going to start putting in where the white is hitting around here. Got that nice pretty outside edge. And then on the inside edge, you'll notice this white kind of comes around, and then we're going to have purple, a little bit of purple shadow coming around that way. So that's going to come around, and then what essentially we're going to see is the really light inside part of this. And leave it kind of uneven. We'll come back and probably put a little bit more paint on there. And then again, come on back in and start putting in some of these lights that we see. So you've got a little bit of a light that comes down. And again, it's really cool to be able to go in and just soften up that line. I have a little bit of paint on my brush. And then I'm going to kind of bring this in, do the same thing here. And have a little more of that yellow showing in through there. And then I'll just kind of continue on down. Not too worried at this point. I just want to get my really strong lights in through here. And then we'll go back and start adding more of our purple middle tone values. Just going to dry off my brush and kind of see if I can do a little dab and let those blend just a little bit. You know, it's amazing how many, this is the third, so this will be the third one I've done of these. I guarantee you not a one of them is going to come out looking the same on any given day. Add a little egg yolk, a little bit of water, and I'll come on back in. Now watch what happens with this shadow as it starts to pop when I put this white in. Holy cannoli. And then the same thing right along here. About right now you're thinking, boy, that sure looks unfinished. Well, it's because it's not finished. All I'm doing here, we're going to be putting those little light strokes in a little bit later. Right now, all I'm trying to do is go in and get that light in here and just soften up the lines a little bit. Notice I'm just kind of letting some of the white drag out. I'm going to take a little bit of that purple on my brush, very dry brush. That purple doesn't just stop. It almost like a lot of that color from the shadow spreads on up. So I'm going to use that color and do exactly that. I may have to go a little bit, make a little bit darker color here. Just kind of trying to show some of that middle tone in through here. And then wait till you see when we go back and start putting the whites in. The other thing I'll do is go ahead, and this should be dry enough to start seeing if I can soften up some of these lines. Just almost dragging the purple. Look at that. I'm going to come back with a little bit more darker purple, meaning a little bit less white in it. Okay, purple I like. A little bit less white. Get my egg in there. And then what I'm going to do is come back and hopefully, I think I'm going to add a little bit more color, a little more, add blue and red to that. If you feel the need to, you can always add just a tiny bit of black. I'm trying to get a little darker than what I have on here already. Let's see. Oh yeah, that's what I wanted. Excuse me. I know that looks a little bit dark right now, but we're going to soften those lines up just a little bit. But I wanted to get that little bit darker color here. And I also want to get that shadow a little bit darker as it comes around this corner. But what I am going to do, instead of just a straight line, I'm going to go ahead and put it in and try to dab. Kind of bring that color out progressively. Again, we'll be toning that down a little bit. And then the other thing we want to do is right up underneath here would be our darkest value. So I'm going to kind of come back, put a little bit more of that dark color in there. And then again, you really can just pretty much use your brush to go in there and cross-hatch if you want. I'm going to bring the color out a little farther than I think I need it so that I can go back in and soften those lines up. Now I'm going to do the same color here so that my values match. And again, this is going on, I had a nice clean line, and now it's going on a little bit dry brush, which is kind of what I wanted. Same thing here, nice strongest part of our shadow right there. Kind of let those edges blend out a little bit. Again, you can play this back and forth as much as you need to. Now I will tell you, I don't know if you can see what's happening right here, but it's kind of picking up a little bit where the maybe they've just got a little bit too much water or it needs to dry a little bit. That happens, just stop. Let it dry a little bit. We'll go back and add a little bit more water in through there. Same thing in through here. Just dabbing a little bit. Now let's come on back in again with some solid white. Little egg yolk, a little bit of water so you can move your brush around if you need to. And I'm going to come back in now, and I want to kind of get rid of this straight edge. Oops, excuse me. Luckily that's going to be background, it'll be covered. Alright, so we'll just kind of come in, bring this edge out a little bit. Notice I put that dark on and it just totally covers it up. You can have a little one right here. Yours doesn't have to be exactly like mine was, and mine doesn't have to be either. And then I'll bring that white around just a little bit more. And then again, I'm just going to kind of let that feather a little bit, blending in to the purple there. Same thing here. And then in through here, you're going to see lots of dabbing. It's like you're just kind of mixing colors together. If you felt like you got a little bit too much of your purple in here, you can always go back in, add yourself a little bit of white in. Same thing here. What I'm going to do is put a little more white and then just use my brush to softly blend in those layers, even right here. Look at how you can dry brush that in. Man, that's beautiful. As my dad used to say, it's enough to make your tongue slap your brains out. Look at that. Okay, now the second, I'm going to go ahead and come on up in through here and kind of start working in some of those colors that I see. You can see there's like a white in through. Now notice I didn't go back and put more strong white. What I'm really trying to do is just show a little bit of detail, blend in some of those edges. Now I will go back in along here, brighten that up a little bit. But again, notice how dry brush I'm working this. And then as you come out, we're going to start seeing some of these parts of the petal. And I'm just going to kind of let them be kind of broken up so it adds a little bit more interest. You notice I started light. It's always good to start light and go darker if you need it. Get this a little bit brighter in through here. Even down in through here. Now, while I'm still working with that white, try to go up in the top and do the same thing again. I'm still seeing some of my gray board, so I want to come back in. This is, you start getting enough layers, watch what happens. Notice how dry this is. Look at how I can literally use my brush to just wash those layers on. Now, wanted to tone down that gray. There you go. And the neat thing is, like with, I guess so many mediums, at least I found that way, that you can go back and work this back and forth as long as you need to. Let me mix up a little bit more white and my egg yolk. Just keep working it back and forth. So I want to make this a little bit lighter. You'll notice, I'll get to that in a second. Let me finish this first. But it's like this is dry enough now that I can literally come in and without even having to get water on my brush, start fading in those colors. Again, you notice I've done this very, very thin layer intentionally. You can always go back in and add more white in. Oh, no, look at how beautiful that's looking. See, you thought I was going to leave all that red on there. But look at how I can come back in and tone that down a little bit. Make sure I don't have any red mixed in there. I'll come up into here. A little bit of white along there. Really bright white. Just kind of blends into there. Same thing over here. Kind of come along. And just literally dry brush. I really want to get rid of all of my dark there. Now, if you'll notice, you're going to see a little bit of this white. Let me get a little bit more paint. Clean off my brush. Put some fresh white paint because I want to be able to get a nice point on my brush. You notice that you've got a little bit of this red up along the edge, and then above that there's a little bit of white. So we're going to make this white, come back and add a little bit of that red to it, and you're also going to see right along here, that edge of white, and just let it blend in. And then the same thing is going to apply on the outside edge of this leaf. You can see that really pretty bright white. And I'll even blend a little bit more of that red out. Now what I can do is go back in, use a very washed out red. What I want to do, hopefully it's washed out, yep. Just want to kind of come in here, just a tiny bit of red on my brush, probably too much. Let me add some more water. I'm going to leave that nice pretty edge at the top. And then I'm going to do the same thing here where I leave that white edge, but I've got a little bit of that red coming down on the inside of it. And then literally just barely blending that. In fact, if you want to leave that for a little while, leave it alone, let it dry. Now, I'm not happy with my yellow, so what I'm going to do is come back in with yellow, a little bit of my egg yolk, and maybe come back, now that I've got more of that white on there, oh yeah, now that I've got more of that white, again, this is really dry brush, adding a little bit more of that yellow in there. And then literally just kind of dragging that yellow and white together. It's going to soften up your line. If you felt like you needed to soften up your yellow, you can drag some of your white into your yellow. And then last of all, go back in and just see if I can subtly blend this. Just get rid of that line a little bit. Some of this stuff, don't sweat the small stuff. You can come back in later. Let it sit for a little while, kind of come back, play with it some more. Right here, I want to get that a little bit softer, but look, I'm just going to drag some of my white up in there. Very, very dry brush. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. Let me come back in and use a little bit of my really, really light purple now. I want to kind of come back in, maybe show a little bit. Notice how light colored I've got this. Just kind of shows a little bit of that detail in through there. Again, oh, heavens to Betsy. Okay, well, that's easy to fix. And I'm even going to go back with that purple color and kind of soften up my shadow here. Sometimes it really does. Look at how nice that blends in now that it's dried a little bit. I don't ever suggest jumping all over the painting, but I do think it helps a lot to sometimes let things dry, to be able to go back and then, just literally with a really light touch be able to blend. Okay. A little bit more water. I'm going to stop. It's not, we continue working on this for quite a while, But from a demo perspective, I want to make sure that we just do a little of everything. Look, I just took a little bit of my white with the yolk I had mixed, and I'm just going to come back in and just softly put a little bit of that light color on there. You may find a little bit of this red. You may find that this is too bright for me, quite frankly, this yellow. So what I'll do is come back. I see a little bit of pink in there, but I'm also going to come back with some of my white and go right through here and lighten that up a little bit. All right. Now, I do want to show you real quickly. I think it's really helpful once you get part of the flower done, like this top part, to come back in. Before you try to get in all your values, it's really kind of nice to know what is the background going to look like around it, because once you put that dark color in, this is going to pop. And you don't want to make your values too dark to begin with. So what we're going to do is we're going to come in, and I'm using a larger brush here. We're going to use a lot of our blue, a little bit of our red, just to kind of get a purple, and then we're going to mix some black along in with that. A lot of egg, again, about the amount of paint that I've got mixed. I'm not worried about having this thick, and I'm not worried about totally covering the paper. What I'm going to do is come in here and not even bother to try to get right up next to the flowers right now with this big old fat brush. What I want to do is just get a base coat put on here to give me an idea of what the flowers are looking like. Now in the areas where you're not tight, it's much easier to go right up next to that edge. If you get a shaky hand, don't worry, you can go back with white over it. Or I can show you how to go back and look at that. Isn't that beautiful? That's what I wanted to show you. Now you see, I haven't got this terribly thick. This is watery. I'm just trying to get a base coat on here. Then we're going to go back and we're going to end up putting a little bit thicker layer on. But it's much easier to put this thin layer on. Whoa, look at that. See, you wonder what it looks like, and all of a sudden you get this little bit darker tone, and my word, does that stand out. See, right up next to there, I'll go back with a smaller brush later. But that just gives you an idea of how pretty. It starts to settle everything down. It's just amazing. I mean, I thought this purple was way too bright. It's not too bright at all. It actually looks really, really nice. So, and then a little bit of water. And then what I want to do is go back in and start putting my middle tone areas in. Now the cool thing again about this is that you can work this back and forth. So I'm going to come along the top and kind of leave that area a little bit uneven because I can blend that together. Notice that my green comes on up this way. Now I'm not going to do the whole stem. But this comes down like this. And then we start to see the light come there. I'm not even blending this right now, folks. I'm going to leave, just so I don't lose it. There's where my bit more water. Everywhere I see my middle tones, I'm going to go ahead and just plan to put those in. I know I covered up some of my lights, but I'll show you how we'll go back in and put those back in again. And the same thing along here. One of the things I wanted to point out to you is, the question is, how do I know I have enough egg? You're going to start to see as we get the background done, you should be able to do your painting like this. And you should see kind of a glossy sheen to the painting. If it looks like you have a flat area, then there's not enough egg mixed in there, and that's very easily solved. All you do is come back with a little bit of egg and water and just wash over those areas, and that can even be done several days later. All right, I'm going to let that dry just for a little bit, and then what I want to do is come on over here and do a little bit of this flower for you. So again, we're going to come back in, and I'm going to use the blue and the red, just kind of letting this dry just a little bit. Blue and the red, and then a lot of white. I'm trying to make a tone like I see, well, kind of like the one that we just used on the other flower. So we'll come back in, see what that looks like. Oh, gosh, I don't know how I did that, but it looks pretty good. So I'm going to come back in here, cover the whole thing. Now I think I'll leave this white just so I remember where it is. Notice that white edge goes all the way around. Back in with some white and my egg yolk, a little bit of water, not a lot, very dry brush, and what I'm going to do is kind of start coming in through here, putting in the white that I see. Now, by the time you get done with the first flower, this should be getting a whole lot more comfortable, and you should be starting to be amazed at what you can do to blend in that type of thing. Take that down a little bit farther than needed, and maybe even a little farther over than needed. I'm also going to go in with that same white, just kind of had to clean off my brush a little bit, and start coming back in. And I'll start, while I'm letting that other area dry, I'm going to come on back in. Start kind of putting some of this gets really thin. As we get down through here, as far as, having the way it looks at the final end, you can go back and forth with your purple and your white as much as you need to make the shape of it to be the way you want. It's really cool. See, this really, you don't see a fine edge here. It's almost like it kind of blends in. So that's what I'm going to do, is kind of leave it where it's uneven. Come back with our dab technique. Now while I'm there, I'm going to go ahead, come over here. Here's where my white edge is hitting on this one. I'm not worried about this being bright white right now because we will come back and add more white in. What I want to do though is to try to make sure I don't leave an absolute edge there. You're also going to see a little bit of that white on this other side. It's not going to be bright white, but it's almost like a reflected light over there. And then we're also going to see in this area, the white area into here. And again, I'm going to try not to leave that really a hard line. Just kind of go in there and wisp it in. So now we'll go back in with a fairly dry brush. I'm even going to try to flatten my brush out a little bit. Notice how with that drying a little bit, what's happening is that I'm getting more of a middle tone purple in through here. And I will drag my purple down some into that. Whoa! I think probably the biggest thing that I could tell you is just learning how to really work that dry brush and not add a lot of water. Oh, look at that. Pretty, pretty. I can tell you that that's pretty much what I did on this entire painting is just, you know, add paint in, let it dry, add more paint, let it dry, lighten something up, let it dry, work on another area. Should have gotten my angle a little bit more this way when I put my white on. When we add additional white, we'll be sure and do that. Again, just drawing off my brush a bit because you can see how it actually, it's like here and it angles this way as it moves around. And I'm going to come back over here and do the same effect over here. Really just trying to go back and forth, kind of blend that in, drag that white over. I'm not worried about keeping my white edge right now at all, because we need to go back and add more white for that anyway. What I am trying to do is show some of this lighter area that we have in through there, just by dragging that color over. I'm going to mix up a little bit more white. Tiny little bit of water. And what I want to do is go back in, not with strong white. Add a lot of water if you need to. I want to go back in and lighten up this purple some. So not right up next to that edge, but I'm going to come back in. You can almost see, add a little bit more water, dry my brush off. Once you have your yolk added to your egg, you can really add more water to lighten tones out if you need to. But you could almost see where this is lighter in the circumference around that center area. So this will help me to kind of start adding a little bit of detail in there, but also to kind of come in and lighten up some of these areas. See, Yeah, sometimes you get a sweet spot, and that's it right there. It just blends beautifully. Almost have this shape that goes around the yellow. So don't be afraid to get too much on there. You can always go back with a little bit of your darker purple again. And even drag some of that up into here. See how that's starting to really, whoa, soften up beautifully? It's when you have to sort of say, ah, there is a God. We want a little bit more white. And then we'll come in through here. This is sort of this color all the way down and through this area here. So we're just going to come in put that color in. Now I am going to come back with just plain yellow, just a little bit of yellow and my white. Get a little bit more white. And I'm going to come back in here, add my egg yolk, and start trying to kind of put in, I think I want a little bit more yellow in there. It's really not a hard line. It's more of a, almost a dry brushing it in. Skip a little space there. Kind of make it whatever shape you want. Your orchid. And I think I'm actually going to use a little bit of that color as I'm coming out. Kind of see a little bit of that yellow repeated. And I may lighten up my orange just a little bit by adding some of that yellow. Oh yeah, that's pretty. Make it a little bit more water. Go back in with our white and watch the outside of this pop. So here we go. It's going to kind of come around. It's going to get thinner and thinner. Oh, that's beautiful. All right, now let me go back in. See a little bit of a purple area right there. And then what I want to do is just kind of show this unevenness. It's almost like the paddle is curling over. And again, you may have to come back a couple of different times and put your white in here, but you don't have to make it solid. You just kind of keep layering here and there till you get what you like. just really breaking things up a bit. Especially what I really liked, and I'll show you in a second, you can play this back and forth. So for instance, what I want is for that nice white to be there, but I almost want this to like fade in and have some of this white coming in towards where the yellow is. So it's like white, middle tone, a little bit darker. So I could actually come back in, drag some of my white in. Kind of soften up those lines a little bit if I need to. And then again, go back and pop that little bit of extra white in there again. Ta-da. All right. We are going to soften up this yellow just a little bit. Again, just real dry brush. And I'm going to kind of stroke it in the direction that the shape is going. And all I'm trying to do is soften up those edges. This requires a little bit of patience. So you can consider that by the time you get done with this, patience should be a true virtue. All right, now we're going to go back in. I'm going to mix up my purple color again, the blue, a little bit of red. I'm going to add a tiny bit of black to that because I want to get this little bit darker color that we end up going back and using over here as well. So it just gives you enough dark to make it a little deeper tone. I know it looks really dark right now, but remember, dark against the light, so this petal's going to have that white right up next to it. Add a little bit of water to that. Bring that up a little bit higher. Just kind of let a little blending there. And I may even use a little bit of that color just to kind of come back where that shadow is here and define the edge of that just a little bit more. And then soften it. All right, I'm going to go back. I'm going to take a break off of that just for a moment. I want to come back and work a little bit more on this. Then we're going to do this, and then last of all, we'll do the background. So what I would like to do is to come back in here with a little bit more white. This time I'm going to practice what I preach and go the direction I should have gone in the first place. I'm going to leave a little bit of my, notice I brought that up farther than it needs to be, and that's for a reason, because I'll be going back in and, see, sometimes you can use the white just to go in and do nothing but lighten up the purple. The difference here is that I'm not using the white super white. I'm just going back in and adding a little bit of detail. And then I'll actually come down and through here. If you'll notice, this outside rim here is a little bit lighter. So again, this is not a super light white. I'm using it to simply go in and lighten up my purple. And I'm trying to look at the way the flower flows and have the paint go on the same direction. So everything's kind of flowing back to here. Tell you what, I hope you love this. It is absolutely such a phenomenal medium to work in. Look at how I can just dry brush that. Beautiful. Alright, now let's come back and have some fun. Let's start adding in a little bit of our yellow mixed with a white. By the way, the water added to your egg yolk really just kind of helps it to last longer. There are things that you can purchase that are like extenders that will extend the life of how long before your egg dries out. And all I'm going to tell you is eggs are cheap. Just get you a new egg. They're not as cheap as they used to be, but they're still cheap. So again, I'm just going to try to leave that where there are no hard edges. Not that it makes any difference because it would blend right out anyway. Now that may not be quite light enough. We'll have to see. Then we're going to come back up underneath here. A little bit of water to that. Look at that. You know, you could always add in more yellow than you think you need because you can always cover it up, which is kind of what I'm doing now. Go back in and break it up a little bit if we need to. May even see a little bit of that yellow along here. Now, if you put it on, you don't find it's light enough, let it dry a little bit. We may go back in and add a little bit of red to that and make it a little bit more orangey. Now, while that's drying, I'll come back in, again, a little bit of my red, a little bit of my white to make that nice, pretty pink color. Add my egg yolk. Get a nice dry brush. And then kind of come back in, start adding in, oh, that's pretty. Start adding in some of the dry brushed areas that we see here. Don't worry if you think you've added too much. Again, you can always go back and put more purple on there. Alright, I'm going to kind of stop there on that because I think I've given you an idea enough of how to work that back and forth. So the last thing that I'm going to do is to come back on the stems here. We are going to, again, mix green, little green, a lot of blue, a little bit of black. Mix my egg yolk with it, a little bit more black. I want to really get this darker green. A little bit more black, yeah. Now I want you to notice that I have tried to leave, it's like a broken up black, so that you have some reflected light that's showing in there with the middle tone, and then also even with a little bit of the light showing, but the light shouldn't be as light as the top value is. Your reflected light's usually a little bit more subdued than that. So I said all that because what I wanted to do was to come back in and leave some of that middle tone showing. And then I'm just going to kind of come in and leave that real uneven. You know how branches are. The darks aren't solid on them. And again, I'm using this fairly dry brush. Dark is just under here. Let that kind of fade up a little bit. Continue with our dark on down this way. leaving, you know, I hope you can see the middle tones I'm leaving in there as well as the lighter areas. Now, we'll also come back in. Let's take a peek at this. We know that we're going to have our darkest area on the right side of this, or excuse me, yeah, the right side of this. I'm going to come back in and I'm going to put my dark in here. That's going to come down to about right there. Don't sweat the small stuff. And then we're going to have, excuse me, that's going to kind of fade over, but we'll put a little bit more of that color in through there. Look at how just getting that in there. We haven't blended it yet and it looks good. Come back over here with our dark there. Again, our little bit of reflected light underneath there. Don't worry if this doesn't look exactly. Everybody's going to be looking at mine when they're looking at yours hanging on the wall. Got that little bit of a dark coming down here and then up this way. I tried to kind of go around my little light area. Just going to kind of blend out those edges a little bit. Maybe make that a little bit darker on that side where the strongest dark is. A little bit of dark showing through here just for the heck of it. Alright. And while this is drying a little bit, what I want to do is come back and I'm just going to kind of come in and use my very dry brush. I may actually put a little bit of green on there. I want to get rid of that bright light. And I may even be able to drag some of my black down. You can soften up where you've done your edges at if you need to. But we really don't want a reflected light to be as bright as the top. Now, if you needed to, you can always go back in, mix you up a little bit more green paint. Again, that's the green with the blue and the black. If you felt like you needed to, you could come back in, add a little bit more of your dark in, kind of broken up again. Now, what I want to do is come back in here, dry brush, just sort of now there's some areas that I kind of went outside of. That's all going to be dark around there, FYI. I meant to, so you've got all that green on there. Come back and just sort of soften up that line. You want to drag the green up, not the yellow down, because the yellow is going to blend right in. You'll lose all your dark green. We're just trying to muddy this line in through here. You can muddy it any way you want. You can dot dot, dab dab, dry brush. We're just trying to kind of get rid. See how that's nice and it's uneven. There's no perfectness to it. Branches aren't perfect. Then we come back in with the yellow and the green, or excuse me, the yellow and the white. And then just sort of, remember, lights they're not consistent. Won't even let that light go all the way to there because of our dark being there. And then this will just kind of do the same thing. So that's how you're going to end up detailing those out.